Hi, I'm back with the timing and logic second part of the tutorial. So if you haven't watched the first part, go watch it. And now I'm going to talk about all the timing and logic. So how to use these and what they do. Well, first of all, I'm going to talk about ignore line. It's a simple thing to debug code. It will just not run what is in the do side and the indented lines, of course. And in fact, it's exactly the same as when false. So but it's more readable like that. So when in your line. So now you also have a not. I've already talked about it. It will just check if the condition is false and not true. So for example, if I use a boolean, I could have not test, and it will be the same as if I were to check if test is false. And if test is false, it will run the do side. Now, all these other types are more complicated, so I'm going to talk about each one of them except for on music measure and on music bit for obvious reasons. I think I'm not really into music, so let's talk about all these. So we have a once. Once is a really important type. It's often used to initialize variables, and this once tells the do side to only run once in the entire game. This is really important. You cannot reset a once type, and it's very different from in the English language. Once something happens, if you put once condition, so for example once test, it won't work. You want another type for that. I'm going to explain it later. So you don't have, well, you have to put absolutely nothing after once. It won't work. Only once, nothing afterwards, and the do side will run once in the entire game. So simple enough. It's very useful to initialize variables. I've talked about the init page in the first part, and this one is important even in these cases because it will mean that if you restart the game with the code in game over, switch page first page, so one or init, this once all the lines that are in once won't run when you enter the page because it already have run, so it won't run again because it runs only once in the game. Even if you switch page, or even if you when you disable the brain, the ones will not be reset. So now we have the started to, which is what you want if you want something like once something happens, it's actually what you want. So let's say you have let's take the example of Boolean, because a Boolean statement is evaluated and it becomes a Boolean fact. So when started to test or your condition, anything, and C. You have, for example, when C and I don't have an apple, I should put an apple. This started to check if in the previous frame this condition was false, and if it is true now in this frame. And if that's the case, then it will run the do side. But something which is important, you have to know that if that line is run in the first frame of the game, there is no previous frame. So the code will just be ignored. Same thing if you have this code inside a page you switch to. If you have a switch page and you have a started to somewhere, which is run at the first frame, it won't work because it will consider that at the previous frame there was nothing, so it doesn't work. It doesn't want to check if it has started to. So you want to make sure that once at least on the second frame the page runs, even with a cold page. So, but before I show that, before I show the cold page, I'm going to show what it does. Will display greeting adventurers and started to see apple. So since it's only true when that condition was false at previous frame and is true now, it won't be true at the following frame. So it will only be true for one frame. I should put some movement code. When left stick move. So as soon as I see my apple, you can see that it displays greeting adventurer, and it only runs for one frame. And I'm going actually to create an acorn, so we'll see that better. And of course, if I haven't the started to here, you can see that it always runs. So now something important. The started to can be reset. It's called tile resetting, and I'm going to show how it works just afterwards. First, I want to show what I was talking about with the code page. So let's say I have my started to here and create a code. Acorn. You'll see that it doesn't work. Okay, I see that I have an init page. I don't want to have that init page. I'm going to switch to the main page, and in the main page I can move, and instead of started to see apple, I'm going to call the page where I've put started to. Where is it? Okay, I'm going to put it back. Create acorn. So you have seen that if I put started to see the apple, it works. But if I call a page where I have started to, it won't work because of what I said. When you have a started to inside the call page and it runs that line first, it won't work because of the fact that at previous frame this code didn't check anything, so it didn't check if that condition was false, so it just ignored. So acorn, you can see I can search and I have my call page. So and now that's not what I expected. Oh, yes, I know. It's when I switch page that it doesn't work. I'm going to explain, because I think I've made a mistake here. So here I'm going to switch page next, switch page, create acorn, but you can see that here I see the apple, so it should run, this should work, but it doesn't because it's in a switch page and at previous frame the page wasn't run, so this wasn't run. And you saw also that if I have this code here, it works because it still doesn't work, in fact, because I am in a switch page and I'm seeing the apple right away. But if I don't see it right away and then I see it, okay, doesn't want to rotate. Always some problems like that. Okay, so but if now, and I forgot to put the switch page in an ignore line, because here I'm switching to that page I don't want. Now you can see that it works. So it's really was the page run at previous frame, and if it was and that condition is false, then you can check if the condition is true at the current frame to run the code. Okay, but you also saw that with call page, and that's where I was wrong, it works. Why does it work? Well, because the call page, I said earlier that it's still in the same, it still runs the same main page, but it just inserts this page here. It will just run this code that's still inside the main page. So the started to will run, but it will be inside this main code, so it will run perfectly fine, because at the previous frame the code was run, and I weren't seeing any apple, and then as soon as I look at the apple, bam, it creates an acorn. So, and I'm going to show some really cool things about another tile, which is page entered. I'm going to show that a bit later. First of all, I'm going to show what no longer is. So it's here, no longer. And it's basically the same thing as started to not. So if you have when started to not and a Boolean statement, a condition. So see the apple. Let's take my inward picker. This is the same as no longer C apple B. And what it does is that it checks if that condition was true at previous frame, and if it is now false, it will run. So it will run for one frame as soon as the condition is no longer true. And now I can just show that. I'm going to, now it's just create acorn. I could put create acorn, it would be the same as calling a page where create an acorn. So I'm seeing the apple and I don't see it, and then bam, for one frame it creates it. When it goes from the condition is true to condition is false. So it's the same as started to not, so nothing new. And now with these two tiles, no longer and started to, you can do a tile resetting, but also with these two. I'll show how to do that afterwards. Let's talk first about these two, how to do a tile resetting, how to reset the started to. Remember, you can't reset once, but you can reset a started to. To do that, you have to know that if you have a condition and this is true, all the lines will run. And for example, if you had something like when my variable do and inside started to, this is the same as when started to test. Why? Because if test was false at previous frame is true now, the code will run once, but also if you put started to here, if this is true, if that was false, it just doesn't run. But if it is true, this line will run. It will check at previous frame, but at previous frame that wasn't run. And if it wasn't run, it considers that what is after the started to is false. This is really huge. This is really important. And also, something really cool is that if you have started to alone, then it's the same as started to true. So, because of that, because it considers that at previous frame it was false because the test wasn't true and wasn't running any code, so wasn't running the started to, then it will consider that at current frame started to true, the condition is true, and so it will run the code. So this is really cool because contrary to just having started to test, you can now put when test some code that you want to run always. You want to run your code as long as test is true, but also at the first frame test is true. So you could have some code display test, and in the started2 you could increment your test variable by 1. So let's say increment by 1, and instead of my test I'm going to put my good old C apple. And look at that. It doesn't display anything if I don't see the apple. As soon as I see it, it increments by 1, only once, because of the started2. But as soon as I leave, the started2 is reset and I can relook at my apple. The display code runs always, as long as I see my apple, but my started2 runs once. So it just increments by 1, and this is really useful. This is something that you use a lot. started2 is really a great tile. Okay. And same thing for no longer, but no longer you cannot put nothing afterwards because no longer alone is the same as no longer true, and no longer true, well, it will never run because at current frame it needs to be false, and that's not the case. So you need to put something after the no longer. Could have some code, so no longer something, no longer test, and it will be reset every time when your C apple is false. That line will be reset because it won't have run in the previous frame, and if it doesn't run in the previous frame, it just resets. So keep in mind that it is not the only tile that does that. The started2 does that too, and the until and after tiles will also do the tile resetting. So that's pretty useful. Now let's talk about page enter, because I've explained how started2 doesn't work when you switch to a page. You enter a page, you have started2, well, it doesn't work because that previous frame the previous frame didn't exist for that tile. So you have to use page enter. This is also a really cool tile. If you have a page entered, and let's say create echo, it will check if at previous frame that page was right, and if if that's the case, it will run that code. It will run that code only once, but contrary to the once tile, it will run that code each time you enter the page. So that's pretty useful. But also it works with call page, and I get a little confused with my started2 and my call page because I actually wanted to show something with page entered, not with started to. And with page entered and call page, you have to remember that this is checking if at previous frame that page was run, and if it wasn't running, and now it runs, then the code will work. So if you call a page at every frame, this will only work once. So let's try it. When page enter create acorn, and I'm calling the page. Let's see if it creates one. You can see it creates only one acorn, although I'm calling the page repeatedly. But now, if I call the page and there is a gap of at least one frame between each call page, then the page entered will run. So let's call the page every 2 frames, every other frame with this code. I'm going to explain the timer afterwards. Now it will create every other frame, it will create an acorn. Because the page entered, see that at the previous frame the page wasn't called, so that's it for page entered. Now I have a for show until after, and current index. Well, I should have talked about it with the pages. Current index, it should just if you don't use it inside a for each loop, it's just the number of the page. So, for example, I call my page create acorn, and if I display current index, you'll see 3 above his head. Well, it doesn't work because that's probably not true. Well, that's not true. What is it then? A number representing the current place within a for each loop. Okay. So I was wrong. It's not current index, it's current page. It's that one. In brains, you have current page, and this is what I was talking about. So returns a number, the current page the brain is running. So yeah, this code will display 3 because it's in the 3rd page. Okay. Remember how I've said that call page is just inserted inside the page? So I have my code here in the 2nd page, and that code is inserted inside here. So it will actually see the current page as the 2nd page, which I think is not really good, but well, I would expect the current page to display 3. So, but well, so now if I have until and after, okay. Instead of checking if something is true and then run it, until is is doing something very interesting, and it is relying on the time resetting a lot, because without time resetting it won't be a really useful time. So in fact it checks if the condition afterwards is true, and if it's true it won't run the line, but it will also not run it at all until the tie is reset by the rule of time resetting. So it won't run at all here forever, because there is there is no parent when that can become false. So here until it won't run anything. If I have until test, if test is true, it won't run at all. But now if my variable is false at the beginning, this code will run, and it will run as long as my test is false. And the first time test is equal to true, that until test won't run the do side at all forever. But of course, if you have that code inside a condition, so when C my apple, this time can be reset if that line is false for at least one frame. The until is reset, so you have to remember that. So let's say, for example, if I see apple until I press a button, let's say I press left mouse button, I display greeting adventurers. And I click, and you can see it won't work. But as soon as I see it again, because when I looked away, because the C was false, the until is reset, so I can look back and it will be true again. But I click, and you can see that it won't work anymore. But I can reset it, of course, and up. So that's how it works. And same thing with the other type, really. It's a bit like with started to and no longer. You have until and after. So after, what it does is it's not running the do side if that condition is false, and the first time it sees that the condition is true, from that point on it will run the code forever until it is reset, of course. So let's see, you can see that it doesn't display anything because I've not pressed the left mouse button. I click, and now it will display greetings adventurer forever. But if I looked away and look back, the after has been reset, so it doesn't display greeting adventurer anymore. I have to click again to see the greeting adventurer. So that's it for after and until. Now I think I have nearly talked about all the types, but current index and for each of. So the for each of loop is actually a two different things. It depends if you put a number or if you put an object set. For programmers, if you know a little bit of programming, a for each of loop is kind of like a for loop and a for each of loop, but not with a number, with an object set. Well, let's say all objects. For each of all objects is like a with loop. A with loop in object-oriented programming. So if I have a number, for each of number, it will run the code 10 times here. But also it will have a number that is the current index. It's in, let's say test equals, and I'll be able to see by timing and logic current index, and this current index is equal to the which iteration it's in. So at the first iteration, test will be equal to 1, then test will be equal to 2, then 3, then 4, etc. You have to note that this code is run inside a single frame. So it runs that line, then it will run that line once, then twice, and until it's done that 10 times, and then it will continue, and that in a single frame. So you could create 10 acorns at the same time. Let's put my acorn, and you can even put some number above it. You remember how I said that an object is useful to keep track of your objects and change their properties, change their variables, etc. Well, you can say an object equals, an object variable equals create object, and it will store the created acorn. So you don't just have to use the URL picker, you can also keep track of your created objects, so that you can set a variable which will be number, or number equals to current index. So remember, that means that we'll create one acorn with a number variable equals to 1, then the second acorn will have a number variable equals to 2, etc. And it will create 10 of these at each frame. And since there are 30 frames in a second, it will create 300 acorn a second. All of these will have a number from 1 to 10. And I can display this number for each of. And now I'm going to explain how to use for each of with an object set. If you have an object set, like all objects, it's an object set, but you could put your own object set variable. Then it will run the code for each object. So if you have 10 objects in your object set, it will run 10 times. But instead of setting a current index number from 1 to 10, here it will set the it variable to the object. So it is the current object it's looking in. But remember, if you have some other for job, for example, inside, it will set the it variable to another object inside that new for each loop. So if I have it here and it here, these two are different. Here is the it from the current from the current object. It's looking in that for each loop, and that one is from that for each loop. So you can, I recommend to, when you're doing nested things like that, you can use an object variable. So object acorn, for example, equals it, and then you'll be able to use acorn to get that it from this for each loop. Okay, so with that for each of all objects, I'll be able to display the variable, the number variable. Well, display, I should have put display, and then the acorn of number variable. So I have to use it for the current object and number, and I want to display above it, or it will display above my player all the numbers. I really want to display the number number of the acorn above that particular acorn. So let's see what it does. You can see it creates a lot of acorns. When it stops creating acorns, it's because there is no more space to create a new one. So you can see the numbers go from 1 to 10. So that's working perfectly. And now, one last thing about this for each loop. You can also use the done executing. Remember that done executing will stop running the brain, all the brain. But if you put that little modifier for each loop, it will just stop running this for each loop. So if you put, for example, when current index equals 5, well, it will run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and at 5 it will see that this is true, and it will stop running the for each loop. So that is the same as doing for each loop and not having this line. But of course, you would want to put some intelligent condition here and do done executing for each loop, for example. So now I know that I've forgotten one thing in the first part, so I want to go back a little and talk about well, two things that I've forgotten. So I'm finished with the delete. I was just deleting the page, so I thought I'm finished with delete. No, I'm finished with timing and logic, so all these times. But I've forgotten to say two things. The defaults, I've already talked about the defaults. You have, for example, when left stick do move, you have some default. is actually move at speed or land speed, and it has some camera relative, which is there by default. But also something which is important, this is run for the prop, for the character, for example here my peasant, because it's a bit like if I had me move. Same thing, if you put a variable like my number variable equals 2, I've said that it was local to the character. It's because there is me here by default. It's me number, it's the number variable of me. But same thing for a lot of functions that are using agents. So let's take attack, or no, not attack, it's a bad example, doesn't work. But some of the basic functions, like I'm going to look at that. Let's say well, for example, shrink or these kinds of things. Also destroy or kill. A lot of these styles have a default which will be me. It's often there. Some of the functions don't have me by default, but most of them do. So you don't have to put destroy me. You can just put destroy. It works. Same thing if you have a... Oh, I've forgotten to talk about the timing here, the countdown and duration timing. So let me finish first with the default. But well, I'm going to explain afterwards that countdown timer have a default of 1 second. So you don't need to put 1. You could put countdown timer. So there are defaults like that simplifies the code a little bit. And the second thing I wanted to say that I've forgotten, I've talked about the fact that if it is true, then the do side is wrong. But there is a second possibility. You could have an object set or an object inside your when side. Do I have any? Well, I have acorn, for example. So what does it do? Because obviously this can't be true or false. So in fact, what it does, it checks if that variable is true, is containing something, and if it contains anything. So if it is different than nothing here, so not equal to nothing, then it will set the it tile to be equal to the acorn, to the object variable you put here, or in word picker or anything. For example, if I put here this code in my init page, I display the apple. But if I had nothing, it wouldn't run the code. So if I had an acorn, for example, and remember that if I don't set my acorn variable, it is nothing by default. So if I display greeting adventurers, here it won't display anything. So this is useful. You can have an object here, and it will set it to that object, and if it is not nothing, then it will run the code. But also something important, you don't want to put equal to nothing or not equal to nothing, if you're using it, because here it's not an object anymore, it's a Boolean statement, so it will be evaluated true or false. And if that's the case, if when side is evaluated to true or false, the it isn't set to the acorn here. And I can show it, display it, and of course let's create our acorn, or the acorn variable will be equal to nothing. We don't want that. So forget. And I'm going also to display greeting adventure, so you can see that the code works. Acorn not equal to nothing works, but it's the display it, the it that doesn't work. So you can see it doesn't display my acorn here. So you really want to have a acorn to have it. So that's important. And same thing for the object variable, So if I put all objects, it's an object variable. It will set them to all objects and it to one of the objects in the object set. So it's a kind of random, so you won't know exactly which one it is. So then, and you can use it then with a for each of, for example, for each of them, display it, and that will kind of work. So, and you can see how now how the it is set. It's because it's for each of an object set, and it's a bit like when you have when object when acorn, for example. It's a bit the same, except that it will run for all the objects in the object set and set it to that object. So when all objects for each of them display it, will display my apple, my acorn, and my pin. And the apple is a bit above this. You can't see them. You can't see it. Okay. And also, I haven't talked about sensors, but it's also something which is important. When you have a detect, for example, or any sensors, detect, see, bump tearing isn't working because it doesn't return any object, but detect, see, bump, in trigger zone, and recast fit, it will look if something has been seen or detected or etc. And if that's the case, it will run the do side. And also, it will set all, well, not bump tearing, I've said that it doesn't work. But for any object sensors, it will work and set the it and them tiles. So the them tiles tile will be all the objects of the detected objects, and the it tile will be one of them. And for example, if you have a recast it will set all the objects hit by the recast in them, and the first object which is hit by the recast will be set in the it tile. So okay, so that's what I had forgotten, and now I want to finish that timing and logic tutorial with the timing logic and the timing tiles, countdown timer and duration timer. So countdown timer, it needs a number, it's in seconds, and after the seconds have passed, it will run the code, and it will run the code from that point. It will run it at each frame, so it won't run just the first frame this becomes true. So it will really run after my 10 seconds have passed, but also after 12 seconds, etc. And if you only want the code to run once the countdown timer has passed, well, I've talked about that earlier. It's the started to. So if you want to code to happen at exactly the 10th second and no longer after that, you have to put when started to countdown timer 10. Also with the countdown timer, this will run always after these 10 seconds, but you could also have a loop, and that means that the code will only be true for 1 second after the 10 seconds have passed, and then in 12 seconds, for example, it will not be true, will not run, but after 20 seconds, it will run once, same thing after 30 seconds, etc. So it's a loop, so I think it's pretty clear, but this code isn't run at the first frame the countdown timer runs, because the 10 seconds haven't passed. But with that loop behavior, you would want sometimes to do that, to run the code at the first frame, and then after 10 seconds, 20, etc. To make it run at the first frame, you have trigger on start. So I think it's also pretty clear. And now I have my 10 here, and that sometimes you want to have something like 10 frames, so a third of a second. You could put countdown timer 0.333, etc. But you can also use in frames, which is a lot more precise, and this will run after these 10 frames and always after this time has passed. And if you want the code to run once after these 10 frames, then started to countdown timer 10 in frames. So that starts to look like something complex. You can do some heavy timing things. You could do some cinematics with these countdown timers. So they're pretty cool, or some music or anything. And remember, I've talked about started to, because a lot of people ask for how to make a code run once after 10 seconds, and always, often some people say, well, do countdown timer 10 and then once, and it will work. But that is only working once in the entire game. If you want that countdown timer to be reset, because this countdown timer can be reset with the time resetting rules, well, the once won't work anymore after the reset, because the once isn't reset. The once runs only once in the entire game, so you want to start it too. For the time resetting to work, all the started to here, and I've explained that you could do that, it's the same. And same thing with the duration timer. It also be possible to reset it. So let's talk about now what does it do. Well, the duration timer will be true as long as the time hasn't passed. So for 10 seconds, it's still in seconds, or in frames if you add in frames afterwards. So for 10 seconds, this code will be true. So for example, I could have display greetings or create icons. And let's say in frames. So I'm going to create 10 icons and then nothing. But I can also reset the duration timer. I've explained it. But let's do an example. When I want let's say I want to press a button, and it creates these 10 icons in these 10 frames. And then let's say I want to be able to press my button again to create another 10 icons during these 10 frames. So I can't say when a button, let's say left mouse button pressed, duration timer 10 in frames, create icon, because that is not true anymore after I've pressed the left mouse. This is only true for one frame. At the moment I click the left mouse button, left mouse button pressed is exactly the same thing as when started to left mouse button. So you can see how that won't work, because this is only true for one frame. So this will only run for one frame. It will only create one icon. I click, and you can see that the timer is reset, so that is working. But it doesn't create 10 icons like I wanted. So I want to use a boolean and set that boolean to true. Left mouse button pressed. So as pressed left mouse equals true. And now I want this has pressed left mouse here. And as long as this is true, this will run. So it will create my 10 icons. But now I want at the end of my 10 icons to create to be able to create another 10 icons. So I want has pressed left mouse button to be false again. And I could use else, because this is false after my 10 seconds. So I could have when not that, or I could have when countdown timer 10 in frames, but I can just say when else it will be the same as saying when countdown timer 10 in frames, because this is no longer true after 10 frames. So you can put this else. And in this else, we want to set as press left mouse back to false. And there will be a problem with that code. Arbor know about that problem. Arbor has had some time resetting problem. I explain what it is. You can see that I can create my 10 icons now, but there's something that could not work well with that. What if I pressed left mouse button a second time? I press it once, this is true, this is run, and at the 10th frames, let's say I press left mouse button a second time. At the exact frame, this is no longer true. So my has pressed left mouse is equal to false, okay? But since I pressed the left mouse button, it doesn't have time to know this has pressed left mouse button, doesn't have time to know that it is false, because it is set to true just at that exact frame. And because of that, the duration timer 10 in frames isn't reset, because it needs at least one frame when this is false. If that isn't false for at least one frame, this is not reset. So if I had to click exactly at the frame this is set to false, the duration timer will not be reset. So how to prevent that? Well, you can just say I want to know when my house pressed left mouse has just become false. If that's the case, I don't want to set it to true. So if has pressed is no longer has pressed left mouse, I want this has pressed left mouse to be only true after one frame. So I'm going to say a boolean set as etc. Set has pressed left mouse equals true, equals false. I don't want to set it. But set has etc. equals to true if I pressed that mouse button. Okay? And now let's see. I have my has pressed left mouse button equals to false. So this is going to be false. And I'm going also to set has pressed left mouse equals true. Okay, so I have pressed my left mouse. When I press it, the problem is that I don't want this code to run at the first frame. I want it to be paused at least for one frame for the duration timer to be reset. So I want some set as etc. variable to say, well, do not run this code for at least one frame. So I want end as press left mouse end set as etc. And since I have my no longer as pressed left mouse set etc. equals false, this will be false and this will be false for at least one frame. But then at second frame I can put an else set as etc. equals true. So to sum up, I have my has pressed left mouse button. When I click, it becomes true. But I don't want the code to run as soon as I have pressed my left mouse button. If the has pressed left mouse button was false and was set to false at the previous frame. So when no longer has pressed left mouse, don't run the code here. Let the duration timer be reset. And in any other case, so from the second frame has pressed left mouse is true, then you can set everything. And now there is the final problem. This code will not be reset, no longer will not be reset, because it's inside absolutely nothing, so there is no possibility of resetting it. But if we put a condition there, I only want to set this code when this is false. Now this no longer has pressed left mouse will be reset when I'm creating the icons. So this is a kind of code you would want to create 10 icons. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work because I have set as etc. which is equal to false at the beginning of the game, and I don't want that. I want it to be true, and now it works. And now if I click, it will work. It will always work, and there won't be any non-resetting of this countdown timer. So you can see that it can become pretty complicated because of all these resetting. But well, if you take time to to try and understand all this time resetting thing, you can improve and start to use it wisely. And so I think I've talked about everything now. But I haven't talked about the Boolean. I've talked about the Boolean statements, but I haven't talked about AND. This AND you saw. There is also OR. So it's really important to know that, well, AND is pretty obvious. If both conditions are true, I have the same variable here. Bool. If both test and bool are true, the code is run. But if you have OR, it's an OR. That means if one of them is true, or both. If both are true, it runs. It also runs. If you want to have, if either one Boolean or the other, and not both, are true, so if test is true and bool is false, or the opposite, test is false and bool is true, it's called XOR, and XOR is coded with an equal to not. Because when that is true and that is false, this is true. So you have true equals true and that's true. And for the case where test is false and that is true, so that is false, you have false equals false. Now if you want to have when something is the same as something, it's the if and only if. If you want the if and only if, you just have to put equal to. So that means that if both are true or both are false. So if test if and only if bool. And finally, really important, these AND and OR are only used for Boolean statements. So I could have when C my apple or and bool. But you can't have, for example, create acorn and something, or you can't have when C apple and another object. Well, that's good. When C apple and acorn, this won't work. The AND is really for only if you want a Boolean here and a Boolean here, like I did with bool here. Here that code is working. But if you want to see several procs, like I was showing here, you don't want AND, you want plus, the mathematical symbol plus, which just means union, in fact. So if you haven't done some math, it just means that you want to have an object set which contains both apple and acorn. So now it will, if it sees the object set apple plus acorn, so Bob, if it sees at least one of the objects here, it will run the code. And it's not if C both at the same time, it's only if C one of them. It's really important. If you have when see object set, you see all objects. It just needs to see one of the objects to run the code and to set them and it, like I explained earlier. So that's kind of how you would want to set an object set too. So if you had an object set, I should have put object set, not object. You could do object set equals an object, acorn, plus another object, etc., plus my apple, etc. Or you could use increment by, like with the number of variables, and that works. Or you could even decrement by or equals and using minus. So for example, I could have object set equals all objects minus my apple, and now if I display for each of object set, display it, you will see only my peasant because it's and my acorn too. Well, I'm not creating any acorn, so you will only see my player and nothing else. You won't see the apple because the apple has been removed from the object set. So I've talked about a lot of things, and I think that's good. That's good enough. I could talk about a lot more things, but I really wanted to talk about the basics, and this should be good to begin to code, to do some complex code, with all these timing and logic types and all these pages, all the organization that I've explained. So now I'm going to give you the link to something that I said that I would give you the link. It's the vector tutorial. If I can find it, and I would recommend to look at it. This tutorial will probably be highlighted, so let's see. The vectors tutorial is a tutorial only about the vector type, and it's if you type vectors in Project Spark, with like that, you can see by Minecraft Max, it's my tutorial on vectors. So this is really useful. You can use it for displaying things, because it's pretty important to know about vectors to be able to do UI, and also to do some other stuff with vectors in the world. And also you can watch the Code Essentials from Bob Schmacky. So it's on the community channel. My vectors tutorial isn't in the community channel, it's on my personal YouTube channel. But here you have the Project Spark community channel. You have some tutorials, and you have the Code Essential tutorial, for example. here. So I would recommend to look at that. So YouTube user project spark.com. And also I would recommend to look at the videos from the official channel of Team Dakota, the Project Spark YouTube channel. And for the community channel, Project Spark community, well, type in Code Essentials and you'll get the video, and you can have the Project Spark community here. So that's it, that's all. So now I'm going to leave, and thank you for watching this stream. I hope you'll be able to do a lot of code with that. I'll do some more brains tutorials. So don't forget to subscribe on my channel and on the YouTube community channel. There'll be some more tutorials there too. So goodbye.